Hello guys, welcome back to another chess video. This is Amit here, and today I'll be showing you an interesting game played by Alekhan versus Paul Kiris, and these are two very well-known grandmasters. And in their game, White opens with d4. Alexander is white, and he opens the game with d4, knight f6. This goes like a queen's gambit, but actually they don't actually get inside the queen's gambit, which we'll know as and when we proceed with the game. So he goes knight f6, knight f3, b6, c4, and bishop b7. So here white plays g3 and offering a trade of a bishop, light square bishop for a knight, but black doesn't take the bishop and he goes e6, bishop g2, bishop e7, and castle. So at this point black also castles, and white plays b3, trying to develop fianchettoing both the bishops, light square and the dark square on the fianchettoing the bishops. And also here white goes for the queen's gambit. Now it gets converted into a queen's gambit kind of setup, and here white tries to occupy the center. Here the knight goes to the center of the board, and he is covering most of the squares here. So he is covering the d7 and c6 and g4, all the squares. He is covering almost 8 squares. That is why usually the knights are best placed at the center of the board, because they attack maximum number of squares at the center. So he tries to cover the center, and here black plays c6 in order to, now the next threat might be like capturing the pawn on the c4 square, and also giving a hanging pawn kind of structure for white. So this can also be one of the idea. And here white plays bishop b2 and indirectly guarding the knight on the e5 square. And here black plays knight to d7, and he is attacking, challenging the knight on the e5 square, whether he wants to exchange it or place it at the center like that. So here one of the idea can be like, if black knight captures the knight on the e5 square, then he can capture back with the pawn, and f4, e4, all these threats may be in the game once knight comes to d2. These are the ideas which can be present in this kind of setup. So here white plays knight d2, and black plays c5, challenging the pawns on the d4 and the c4. This, now both black and white are having similar kind of setup, except that the bishop, white light square bishop, is on the g2 square, and which is preventing black from capturing the pawn on the c4, and hence because of the pinning of the bishop on the b7. So here white plays e3 and rook c8, rook c1, and these are normal developing moves. Now here black's main focus is to get his queen to guard the bishop and double up on the c file. That is why he has played the rook to c6, but c7. But this, we can see in the game that this becomes a cause of black losing a lot of tempes in the game, and he eventually loses the game, so which we'll get to know as and when we proceed with the game. So here white plays queen e2, black plays queen e8, guarding the bishop on the b7, so that now the next threat is to take the pawn on the c4 and try to exchange off the light square bishop. So here white instead captures the pawn on the d5. So if black is allowed to capture the pawn on the c4, then if pawn captures back and c5 captures d4, then the pawn, if pawn captures back, then there will be two hanging pawns. Hanging pawns in the sense they do not have any support from any of the pawns from white side. So those are called hanging pawns. If black captures the pawn here, and white captures with this pawn, and black captures this pawn, and white captures with this pawn, then white's two pawns are hanging. So here white himself captures back in order to prevent the hanging pawns, and here knight captures the pawn, because as I told you earlier, then if pawn captures the pawn, then black will be left with the hanging pawn. So in order to prevent that, he allows white to capture, and black captures the pawn with the knight, and prevents the hanging pawns to be in place. So here white plays e4, attacking the knight, and the knight is pushed back. And in this position you can see that the rook on the c7 is actually hanging if pawn takes the c5 pawn takes the d4 pawn. So white immediately takes advantage of this situation and then pushes the pawn to b4. So once b4 is pushed, now the pawn cannot take the pawn, and here rook fc8 is played. So this is also kind of a mistake, because now white will take very advantage of this position, and you can try to figure out the move for white which will allow black to kind of maintain his position, and it will give an advantage for white, gives a lot of tempi for white. You can pause the video in order to find that move. Yeah, the move is white captures the pawn on the c5 square with the d pawn. Now black captures back with the b pawn, and here white pushes the pawn to b5. This is the better move, because now these two rooks are kind of pointless, because now they have no hope, because this pawn on the c5 is actually guarded twice already by the two minor pieces, and there is no necessity of two rooks guarding the pawn. So they are kind of stuck at the c file, and they lose a lot of tempi if they want to move to the d file, like rook d8 and rook c8. They will lose a lot of tempi. So at this position white is having a bit of an advantage. So here black tries to exchange of the b pawn for the a pawn, but white instead pushes the pawn to a4, and once captured he captures back with the pawn. And here white is much more advanced pawn structure, and this pawn on the b5 is actually moving, has only 3 squares to cover to get to the queening square. So here black plays queen a7, and white goes knight c4. So knight to c4 is actually next move can be like pushing the pawn to b6, and once knight captures back, then, or even if knight comes to b6, then rook a1, and knight has to move to a4, and there will be a lot of threats like b6, or even knight b1 and knight c3 once queen moves. So all these kinds of threats will be there. So here black played queen e8 in order to not get into that kind of position, and white captures the knight on the s6, and black captures with the pawn. Now if knight captures the bishop, then knight goes to b6 and forking the queen and the rook. So anyways he captures. In order to prevent that, he captures with the pawn, and even then white goes b6. Now black's rook is stuck, so he has to come to c6. Now here anyways the rook is actually trapped. So instead of taking the knight with the pawn, he could have actually taken the knight with the bishop with the knight and allowed a direct fork instead of getting into a double pawn kind of structure on the king side. So that was kind of better idea, but he captures with the pawn, and anyways white goes b6 and rook c6 and e5. Now the black rook is attacked by the bishop, and he has to sacrifice the rook itself. So he captures the pawn on the b6. Now knight captures. Now the bishop on the b2 g2 cannot be captured because the queen itself is attacked. So here knight captures the knight, and bishop captures the b7, and queen captures the b7. And once the queen has captured, now the pawn on the f6 falls and bishop captures, and now here knight comes to e4. So at this current position we can see that black has a bishop and a pawn for a entire row. So black is exchanged down, but it has a passer at its disposal. So here black goes bishop to e7, and white gives check, and king h8, and queen to f4. So here white is attacking the pawn on the f7. So in order to defend the pawn on f7, he has to either go king g8, or he has to take the bishop back. In the game he takes the bishop back to f8. So here we can pause the video in order to find out the crushing blow, after which Paul Keres resigned the game. So the move is knight takes the pawn on the c5. Now if rook captures the knight, then rook captures the rook, bishop captures the rook, then queen gives check on the e5 square, and king comes to g8, then bishop is captured back. So it will be a loss. And if bishop captures the knight, then rook captures the bishop, then rook captures the rook, then queen gives check on the d4 square, and then he will lose the rook, and white will be simply an exchange up with no compensation for black. So at this black tries to exchange off the queen by playing it to c7, and here there is another discovery. Now the knight captures the e6, which is the discovery. So black cannot capture the knight because rook is attacking the queen, and if queen captures the queen, which happened in the game, and then knight captures the queen, and then at this position Paul Keres resigned the game, as he is simply a pawn down and an exchange down. So it is no reason to continue, so he resigned the game at this point. So hope you like this video. If you like this video and are new to my channel, please subscribe. Thank you all for